Hey everyone, welcome to the Corey Boutwell podcast. Today I am with Scott Way, leadership master from BDO. So today we're going to have a discussion on leadership. Scott has you've travelled the world as an organisational psychologist, consulting on leadership, and you've done a few different degrees in psychology, and then also completed your Masters of Business. And I met Scott at my normal job, not my second one. I always got extremely fascinated by the conversations that we would have, and then the results that people in different teams in companies that would get out of the leadership. You could even just say mythology, knowledge and theory. I thought was just absolutely fantastic, and how Scott also applies it to different things. He applies like the Australian psychology of leadership compared to the American, and he knows all the different the transition of leadership throughout however many years. So I think that's really quite fantastic. Scott, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So we'd just like to have a little topic. So on as far as leadership goes, just for those who don't know, how would you best describe leadership? What is a good example?
Well, it's an excellent question because there are a lot of myths, as you said, around leadership, and the popular media would have us believe that there's sort of one style of best leadership, which is strong and resolute and leading from the front. The trouble is that situations, as they differ and change, require different styles of leadership, and a lot of the people that we deal with aren't so familiar with the range of styles. So we do spend a lot of time running training programs on just different approaches to leadership. Yes, the strong and the resolute approach is necessary. COVID times are a good example of that. Sometimes I call that leadership from the front. But there's also leadership from the rear, where you've got a mature group of, say, professionals or semi-professionals. They just need support. They just need some assistance to do their job. They don't really need to be told what to do. And then there's everything in between. And it can change. That's the other issue. It can change from circumstance to circumstance or situation to situation. But again, my biggest fear for leaders is what's sometimes described as being the one-trick pony. There is only one approach to leadership. Doesn't matter whether the situations are good or bad. They just have one approach. Whereas we would advocate, well, you need to vary your style, vary your approach depending on the situation. If you were to ask me, well, what goes up to make a leader, I actually think it starts with we know about EQ, but there's LQ, and that's
which is EQ is an emotional
intelligence. But LQ, and it's not my term; it's a term that's used. I think it was coined at Bond University. In other words, you need to actually understand what leadership is.
Leadership intelligence.
And so going off to some sort of leadership training to be trained on what leadership is a heck of a start. So some people are leaders because they just don't have LQ. They've just never been trained. So they do the best they can with what they've got. So they look around and they say, well, I like the way Fred does it, or I like the way Mary does it. So they copy Fred or Mary, or both, or a blend. And it's a bit sort of homespun, homemade, which is not really the way to go. Even if you were to cook at home, you need some sort of recipe, some sort of guide to say, well, do this and don't do that. So equipping people with some of those leadership tools so their LQ rises is a heck of a start. And that's, we would say, understanding some of those leadership models. So there's that transformational leadership, there's servant leadership, there's situational leadership, there's any number of the leadership models. If you were to type into a search engine, you'd probably get 100. And so just understanding that there's a range of these out here, and you need to plug and play according to each situation.
What do you think are the top 3 most common ones at the moment, and just a brief description of them?
The top 3 at the moment, one of them would probably be transformational, which is that sort of stronger leadership from the front, particularly where organisations are under the pump. So a lot of Australian organisations are trying to do more with less, and so you do need some stronger leadership to maybe challenge the status quo or challenge the situation. I do think that there's scope at the moment. It's not being spoken much about, but there is that sort of servant leadership, which comes out of sort of Southern America, and some work done by a guy called Robert Greenleaf. But that's where the leader's role is to support his or her people, so that they are then free to do the job that they're employed to do. I think that servant leadership approach works quite well here in Australia, and is not dissimilar to the leader as coach paradigm, which is floating around, where the role of the leader is to coach and train and support their staff so that they can do what's required of them. And then the third approach that seems to be reasonably common is this, what's known as adaptive leadership, and that's coming out of the northeast of the United States, a guy called Robert Heifetz and Marty Linsky. Again, the model is sound, but it's in Australia we would know it more like group decision making, where the role of the leader is as facilitator. It brings a group of people together and says, look, we're dealing with a wicked problem or something that's really complicated, not quite sure what to do here. Turns to his or her people and say, well, what do you think is going on here? So you might whiteboard it or stick up post-it notes or whatever. And then collectively you might work a pathway, work out how to get your way out of that situation. And so collectively the group would come up with a course of action and then execute it. So that I think they seem to be the ones most commonly see that transformational leadership from the front, that sort of servant leadership or leader as coach, and then the third being the adaptive leadership, particularly for complicated issues.
I really like that. What about if someone were to get if they wanted to get started as a leader, how would they get started? What skills would you recommend them first developing?
Well, there's a school of thought known as authentic leadership from a guy called Robert George, I think his name.
It's a lot of Roberts.
Yeah. Bill George. Bill George.
Yep.
And he wrote a book, and the name escapes me for the minute, but he wrote a book in 2003 and said, look, in order for leaders to be effective, they really need to get their own act together. So a useful start, and I suppose I'm a bit biased as a psychologist, it is useful to have an understanding of what makes you tick, some of your own strengths and weaknesses.
Do you have any exercises for those?
A couple of them would simply be, listing your strengths.
Yep.
What are some of the things that I'm pretty good at? Reflecting and introspecting a bit on some of the things that I don't do so well. Jotting some of those down. Maybe going through some sort of feedback process. Now, whether that's a 360 or whether that's doing a Myers-Briggs type indicator or some sort of psychological test is going to be useful. Even sitting down with people whose opinion you value and trust, and just asking them, what do you see? What do you think I do well? What do you think I do poorly? So that Bill George would suggest that that's almost an essential start, and that is to sort of work out who you are and who you ain't. Then I'd suggest that people sign up for some sort of leadership program just to learn LQ. Now that could be an online program. There's thousands of programs out there. Those mass online open courses, MOOCs, as I think they're known. But it could be a TAFE course, it could be a uni short course, it could actually be a university degree, but to actually learn how to be a leader before you become a leader, if that makes sense, before you dropped in the deep end. And again, we wouldn't do that to a footballer. We wouldn't say to a footballer today, well, the best way to learn about football is to go and play a game. And you go, well, no, I need to know how to kick a ball, I need to know how to catch it. I need to know, where to run, what to do, some training. But we unfortunately do commonly push people in the deep end and say, no, you'll be right, just learn it as you go. Well, it could be that you're making a whole bunch of mistakes, not just for yourself, creating the bad behaviours or bad habits, but also contaminating potentially a group of people that you work with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you reckon you could use an example of bad leadership and good leadership and make a little bit of links between both? Do you have any examples of those, between what like the difference is?
Well, the bad leaders, I think, are those who are disempowering, where their contribution to a work environment actually makes matters worse, not better.
Like what would be like an example of that?
Well, particularly if you've got a group of professional people who are, who are half trained and half decent, and so a major turn off, particularly for Australians, is micromanagement. So where the leader comes in and starts telling people, you need to do this and you need to do that.
Yeah.
Now, assuming they're doing things okay to begin with, so it's okay to be corrected if you're doing the wrong thing, but if they're basically doing the right thing, then the next minute people say, look, I'm not going to make a decision now. You're going to make all the decisions because you're just going to correct me anyway, so I may as well just sort of sit here and just do what I'm told. So that disempowered approach is probably the worst, and that's where you see people who are just, they don't really care. They've, the lights are on but no one's home. They go to work and they say, like, if you want me to stand on one leg, I'll stand on one leg. I don't know why I have to stand on one leg, but I'll just stand on one leg because that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
So they're some of the worst leaders, and I do feel a bit sorry for some of those folks because very often they're poorly trained and they just don't have the right skills. So not that that's a defence, but it sort of explains their behaviour. The best leaders that you see are those people who are almost like the gifted athletes. That they're pretty silken in what they do. They make a group of people better, and so that their presence contributes to the environment that they're working in, and as a consequence, people are glad for that person to be there. Now, it could be that it's a younger group with fewer skills, and so they're providing good direction and good guidance. It could be a more mature group, and as I said, maybe that's servant leadership or leader as coach, and they're just there supporting that group of people to do their job. How some linkages between the two? Well, as I said, sometimes I just feel sorry for poor leaders, not because they're not decent people. It's just that they don't know what they're doing, and sometimes they'll. Again, it's a million years ago now, but when I was working in the Commonwealth Government, I asked for some leadership training and was flatly told no. And yet I was running a section. I had sort of 25 or so staff and a reasonable sized budget, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I just said, can someone help me here? No. And you go, oh, okay, so you want me just to sort of fumble and bumble along here. And so it was a bit bizarre. That's when I did my MBA, thinking, well, maybe the MBA would give me some answers.
Did it?
It gave me some, perhaps not as many as I would have hoped, because I was looking for the silver bullet.
Yeah, which was more leadership focused with things, or?
Well, no, I was hoping for the one right way, and there isn't one right way. But I suppose what I'm getting at is that if to be an effective leader, it's like being an elite athlete, of which plenty of stuff about. You're not going to be an elite athlete overnight.
Yeah,
it's going to be
so true.
It's going to be a longish journey. Now you can speed it up and you can hothouse it.
Yep.
But it's going to be well, notionally they still just talk about the 10,000 hours. It's going to be that 10,000 hours. So organisations that are probably doing it better are those who are investing more time in talent management, saying that this person has the potential to blossom into something, so we're going to start them early.
Yeah.
And that might be, as we've done with some of your colleagues, that might be an aspiring leaders program.
Yep.
And there's no expectation that they'll be leaders next year or even the year after or the year after that, but just getting people thinking about, well, what is leadership? Is it for me? Because it's not for everyone. What are the skills that I need to learn about myself? What are the skills I need to learn about others? So that there is that sort of developmental curve, that developmental pathway.
Yeah, so what are some of the qualities and things that you focus on with people who would be aspiring to be leaders?
Well, they would want to be leaders, and there's no doubt about that. Some people are not up for it because they just like to do the technical stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want to have to sort of deal with the people stuff.
Yep.
Some people just aren't up for it because it depending on the work environment, could just be daily challenges, every day, just getting hammered by events and problems and things to fix. And some people say, that's not their style.
Mm-hmm.
They just prefer to, focus on one thing and beaver away and do whatever.
What about the people that want to be really good leaders but find a frustration in terms of trying to get there?
Yeah,
they get with people and when they're working with people or trying to inspire people or leadership people or motivate people, and they get a little bit frustrated for something, and then next minute they're trying to demand attention but they can't get it, or they can't inspire others. What kind of...
Again, and I'm biased because I'm a psychologist, but we know that human behaviour is slow to change. So some of that frustration can come from people's behaviour just changing too slowly for them. But the reality is, human behaviour changes slowly.
Mm-hmm.
So having some patience and some calmness to recognise that if Fred or Mary is shifting by 1 or 2 degrees each day or each week, then there's movement in the right direction. Is it fast enough? No. Would they prefer for it to be faster? Absolutely. But short of that sort of classic aha moment, most behaviour just changes incrementally. I do think it's advantageous if people are having small wins along the way. That's one way of dealing with the frustration. And so again, if you were working with a group of people and you were trying to demonstrate some leadership qualities and things were going pretty slowly, but you got them to milestone number 1, you might want to get them to milestone number 3, but at least they've got to milestone number 1. Then recognise that as a small win. You feel better about that. Now, it's that classic glass half full, glass half empty. Just focusing on the half full bit and saying, well, at least we got them to milestone 1. And next comes milestone 2. Some of this stuff is a bit. It's I think it's a logarithmic function where, once people get going, then they take off.
Yeah.
It's a bit like learning something,
Building a bit of a foundation there before...
Yeah. If you're trying to learn how to snow ski or water ski, you sort of got to get to a particular level. Once you get to that level, then you tend to take off. So I think once people get to that particular point, either in coaching others or even self-coaching, then things start to become a bit easier and they take off. So again, I just think being a bit patient and tolerant of individuals some of whom are faster learners, some of whom are slower learners.
Interesting. So what do you think would be one of the best ways to actually deliver a message when you do notice that you're frustrated?
Well, if you are frustrated, then you've got to be careful about the right time, right place, right language.
Yep.
If you are frustrated, then maybe just give yourself 5 or 10 minutes to calm down and refocus and re-deliver it again. If we're talking about Australians, and culturally we're different to other nationalities, but Australians much prefer the down-to-earth nuts and bolts. It doesn't have to be sort of hyped up or amped up or revved up. It's something that's just quite practical, simple, easy to follow, and hopefully coming off a base of reasonable trust where that person has demonstrated that they are, trustworthy and fair income.
What would be a example of that?
If you were... If I just talk about public servants for the minute, sometimes public servants are asked to do stuff that they would prefer not to do, but that's what the minister wants, or that's what the legislation says. I think being upfront with, particularly, half smart people, and saying, look, folks, we don't really have a choice about whether we do or don't do this. The minister's asked it; it's in the legislation. We'll be in contravention of the Act if we don't do this. So acknowledging that and then saying, okay, given that is a given, okay, now how do we make this somewhat difficult situation into as good a situation as it can be? That very sort of practical, honest I think Australians go, oh, okay, well, that's fair enough.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially if you're talking about just like for normal people, we'd just be like, what's the rules? What's the vices?
Yeah.
What's the business plans?
Yeah,
what's your own personal development plans? Like whatever it is.
Yeah.
What's all of these different things? Laying it out, being able to talk about it, and then saying, all right, now let's best case scenario.
Yeah.
This is what we got to do. Let's give it a crack.
Let's give it a go.
Yeah.
Be a bit, cut some people some slack because not everyone's going to get it straight away. Again, that's back to that sort of individual differences around learning. But given the right sort of support, most people will get on board. Every now and again, you'll find a person who's the square peg in the round hole, and that's not because they're not a good person. It's just maybe it's
just a square peg.
They're just a square peg, and you might need to say to that person,
"You're a square peg." No.
Well, not so much you're a square peg, but saying to someone, maybe it looks like you're struggling here, or Mary, this doesn't seem to be your sort of role. Can we talk about it? And then providing some support. Organisations don't do this anywhere near enough, and saying, what can we do to support you while you do find the role or the situation that best suits you?
Interesting. So, how would you also best think that a leader? Or some leadership position, the best way for them to actually get the attention of the people that they're trying to lead?
I think you've certainly, again, Australians would want to see you invest in that trust. So again, slow and steady wins the race. So
what does that look like as far as investing in trust?
Well, if you're convening a team meeting, then the team meeting happens. That you don't cancel the team meeting. If you said you were going to do something, then you follow through on that and you deliver. Integrity
with your word.
Yeah. And then but on the flip side of that, also showing some compassion towards individuals who might struggle and say, all right, well, what can I do to support you? Is it a turn of phrase? Is it training? Is it sending you off on a program? So that over time then, people see, again, Australians, see you as just one of them. So then when you say, sorry guys, I've got to change my hats, and I quite like using that metaphor, you sort of take your worker hat off and put your leader hat on, and you say, look, sorry folks, got to put the leader hat on for a minute. This has come down from above. We really do need to do this. You know my view on this, but we don't have a choice. Okay, let's do that. So I think investing in sometimes it's described as the goodwill bucket, where you invest in the goodwill that people have with you and for you, so that if you have to make a withdrawal and ask them to do something that can be a bit challenging, they've got a sense of who you are, where you're coming from, why you're asking them to do X, Y, or Z, and the fact that they'll say, oh well, Corey wouldn't ask me to do this if he really didn't have to. If you don't make that sort of investment, if there isn't that level of trust, then because human beings are sense makers, then they're saying, what's going on here? And they'll happily put 2 and 2 together and come up with 22. In other words, it makes sense to them. It could be a long way away from reality, but it makes sense to them. So they go, okay, well, he's untrustworthy, or she's untrustworthy, or couldn't run a bath, and so I will or won't do it.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense, especially if someone's in a frustrating position where they sort of really wanted to gather or capture attention for a second. It's well, instead of trying to gather or capture attention, it's build it first, as you're saying, before it comes up with everyone in your team. Cultivate it through being integral with your word and filling up the goodwill basket, as you're saying. So that way, when you get into those positions and something that's frustrating that's happening, you can just explain the situation, and everyone's going to be we get it, and we trust you.
Yeah, that's correct. Let's go. That's correct. So again, it's having that sort of longer term view. I think there's one thing that Australians can learn from some of our Asian cousins, and that is that they do tend to play a longer game.
I remember at uni just studying, they would say it was always for business deals. When it comes to Chinese or Japanese people, is that you would have to have dinner with them 6 or 7 times, going out for drinks and literally build a friendship before making one business deal. And for Australians and Americans, which let's just do the deal. And they're like, oh, this is so frustrating. But it ends up like making a lot of sense to me as far as like, okay, if you actually really know each other, you know the little intricacies and things that you can actually make the most accurate, best decisions moving forward, because it's going to be a relationship, so there's give and take there.
Correct. I think the Chinese word is guanqi or something along those lines, and it is investing in that relationship. It is trying to understand the other person and their respective strengths and weaknesses, but that's investing in that trust. Australians and Americans and the British, we have a view that if there's a business deal, then the contract will define everything.
Okay.
And so typically the situation in Australia or the UK or United States would be business first and relationship second, whereas in Asia, not all Asian countries, but some Asian countries will be relationship first and then business second. So a bit of a blend doesn't hurt, and I think in the leadership space, investing in that relationship. To be an effective leader also, you do need to get to understand the people that you're working with, and seeing that as real work, rather than just as sort of, a nice to have. I'd say it's almost front and centre, and some of those people will be high maintenance, some will be low maintenance, some will be techo types, others will be people types. You do need to get to know them and see that as something worth investing in.
Interesting. I just had a few questions just popped in my head. So what do you think would probably be like the best way to like deliver a message?
Well, yes, as I said earlier, I think if it's down to earth, practical, easily understood, wrapped together in a bit of a context. There's an author by the name of Nassim Taleb who wrote a book called The Black Swan, which is a bit of a solid read, but he describes the power of the narrative. I'm sure he didn't invent the term, but in other words, there's got to be a bit of a story. There's going to be a story there. So that people, and again, particularly Australians, go, okay, now I get it. Okay, now I understand it.
Analogies and stories, and that makes sense.
So if you paint that picture, saying, well, here's why we want you to do, here's the context of what's going on, then again, most Aussies will go, oh, okay, well, now I get it. And if they're not getting it, then you get a bit of pushback. But the pushback is almost reasonable because they're saying, but
they don't get it.
I don't get it. And so it's not necessarily our fault, it's their fault, it's our fault because maybe we haven't painted the picture so that that the penny drops.
So how do you think like people will actually get good at being able to deliver a story or deliver a message?
Well, again, it's an excellent question. There is no substitute for doing it. Some of the better orators floating around, the Barack Obamas of the world or the Winston Churchills, it was often thought that they were just naturally good at it. But again, when you read biographies about those people and autobiographies, they practiced and rehearsed. So it can be investing some time and effort in the practice and the rehearsal. Now that could be, in the car on the way to work before you deliver the message, rather than trying to do it off the cuff. It could be practicing the message many times. So in other words, you might have delivered similar sorts of messages to different groups in different locations, and so you just get better at it. But there is no substitute for just good old basic practice. Now, some people will be better at it, naturally better at it, so they're exceptions. I suppose my advice is no, just don't wing it. If you try to wing it,
be prepared.
Then you could get a question that you can't answer. You may say something that's inappropriate. It could be that you phrase it poorly so people don't understand it, they just don't get it. So a bit of practice can give you a much better rate of return.
That makes a lot of sense. Like as you were speaking, telling that, like my childhood, I grew up singing, dancing and acting. I think one of the things we used to do for acting all the time was I'd have to like learn scripts and do whatever, and I'd always, if we had to deliver a really good acting thing or was in front of a camera or on stage or something, I would be spare time, like my own spare time, I'd just be going through
Yeah.
the actual rehearsals in my own head or speaking. And it makes a lot of sense, especially for people, depending on what leadership positions that they're in.
Yeah.
They may not be aware of what's going to be coming up. But just understanding that if they really want to motivate, influence, and help people to get things done, is sort of just even run through certain situations and what they would say for those specific things. So when the problem does arise, or they have an opportunity to like really influence someone, then they have the best chance to do so.
Correct. Yeah. So it's almost as if you've got a sort of a kit bag of responses that you can use at the right time and right place.
Which is, really hard for people, because if you said to say to someone like, one of the best ways to be a leader is learn some of these different perceptions and learn some of these different situations of when you would deliver a certain influencing or motivational message, and have a few in the kit bag. And how do you do that? Well, you got to think of the situations and probably write them down, otherwise you're going to forget. And then you have to have some points, write some points for those situations, like write them down. Otherwise, you're going to forget. And then start rehearsing them and actually start doing that. And a lot of people won't actually sit down, take the time, write it out, think about them.
Correct.
And do that.
Now, some of the folks who are listening and watching will know of a guy called Bruce McAvaney, who was a TV and radio commentator. He's doing less of it these days, but he was famous for his preparation. That he would have his exercise books. He would have accumulated a whole bunch of statistics about people and backstories about athletes that he was commenting on, and so it sounded as if he was he just had a head full of information. Well, he did, but it didn't come by accident. It didn't come by fluke. There was a lot of time and effort and preparation went into that. Again, if you're fed income about whatever career or role you might be in, then you need to understand, again, it's almost that 10,000 hours that, you don't become a good golfer by hitting the occasional golf ball. You don't become a good tennis player by hitting the occasional tennis ball. You hit lots
every
of
day.
You hit every day. And then you start to think about, and I was only thinking about this yesterday when I was watching the footy, and, you're seeing football coaches who are, being driven insane because their players are not doing perhaps what has been discussed or agreed, to then come to the after-match press conference to then say, how do you respond? Well, if you're winging it, then a whole bunch of stuff may come out and it may not be the right stuff, whereas you're thinking, no, if you look at, say, the Adelaide Football Club yesterday, then you'd be, hopefully, if you're Matthew Nix, you'd be reminding yourself of, well, we've got, I think I heard the statistic, at least 12 or 16 players in the team who are eligible for the NAB Rising Star. So in other words, you've got a whole bunch of young players who are doing a pretty good job, although the team is getting beaten. They're learning and getting better every day. So you can focus on the mistakes that they made, and that's not going to come across terribly well. Or you can focus on, we lost, that's disappointing, but look at the progress that Fred and Billy and Joey made, that sort of stuff.
And that's all what you're mentioning beforehand, is in the foundation before it goes up. Literally just being like down to earth, practical, and as a leader explaining the situation without any biases in there.
So that's the sort of preparation that you can do. If you've got a team meeting coming, you can prepare for a team meeting. If you've got a difficult message to convey to staff, then you can work out how you might pitch it and package it.
How would you best prepare? Just like some real quick little, practical tips. If anyone listening, they're like, I've got this thing coming up and I really want to prepare for it. But now how do I do that?
I do. So, for example, I'm starting delivering a program tomorrow, and I'm already thinking about how I might start it, and running, as you were doing when you were younger, I'm running scenarios in my head. If I'm driving to the shops, or if I'm commuting to work, if I'm doing something in the garden, I'm just running scenarios and basically mental rehearsal, mental practice before I get there, so that it's not lights, camera, action. That sort of internal rehearsal, internal preparation. If it was if it had higher stakes on it, if I was doing a presentation at a conference, which I still do. I still do get nervous about that sort of gear. And so I will invest more time in preparing and more time in writing notes or slides or just general prompts, cue cards, those sorts of things. Pretty standard. It's not any sort of recipe, any sort of mystery. It's pretty standard stuff.
I like that. It's so simple and practical. What do you think would be some of the best ways for someone to really get into, I guess, really influencing or motivating people? What would be some of the best strategies? In like a good way, like if people are already pretty good and they just want to let's just get everyone really motivated.
In the context of leadership, so I mentioned LQ, but then relating to LQ is what I describe as micro skills. And micro skills are where people have a bunch of these sort of mini skills. Now that could be problem solving and decision making, it could be creativity and innovation, it could be conflict management, any number of those micro skills. And one of those micro skills is persuasion and influencing.
Yep.
I do say to people on training programs, if you find yourself in a leadership or management position, not a bad idea to have at some stage done some sales training. It sounds a bit weird, but what you're doing is selling an idea or selling a notion or selling a concept or selling change, and it's I don't think it's any surprise that some people who've become chief executives, for example, have risen from sales and marketing ranks. In other words, they know how to sell an idea or sell change, but also they've learned how to sell themselves. So having done a stint, now this could be a university job, it could be a part-time or a weekend job, but having learnt some of those sales skills, I think is a really useful way to go. Now, what are the skills within that? Well, good salespeople are good questioners. They're good listeners. They're able to understand the person that they're working with. Some people may require a gentler approach, others a more robust approach.
Sort of adaptive to the energy.
Yeah. So if people, again, you can find some of this stuff on the web. You could go to a TAFE course, you could sign up to a uni course, but some sales training would be handy to help you work out how to package and to pitch the message depending on your audience.
Yeah, I really like that. Another question, what do you think, I guess so many leadership questions, what do you think would be like the three biggest things for leaders that they need to overcome internally before getting into external stuff?
I do think the Bill George stuff of being authentic is really important. In other words, understanding what makes you tick.
Yep.
Very difficult, I think, to lead someone if you're if you're sort of disorganized in yourself, not in a planning sense, but you don't know what your respective strengths are, you don't know what your weaknesses are.
Yep.
Human beings are quite leaky, so that stuff leaks out and people will pick up and they say, well, he doesn't seem to know what he's on about, or she doesn't seem to know what she's on about. So certainly investing in that. The ability to communicate a clear message is important. So mastering that skill is important. And as I said earlier, I think you really need to be comfortable in wanting to lead. To putting yourself out there. Not everyone is happy to sort of be at the forefront of things. And if you're going to be the leader, then you need to understand that you're going to be in the spotlight. Maybe you're going to have to make some difficult decisions. Not everyone's going to like or appreciate what you've said or done, but maybe that's what's required. That's not everyone's cup of tea. So if they're the sort of three danger zones, then the flip side of that is, well, what are the three positives? Then being able to do those three things in a positive way,
yep.
In a half decent way. And I do think if people can see that you're at least trying to do it, then Aussies in particular, I think, are going to be quite forgiving. If you're trying to masquerade who you are or why you're doing what you're doing, then Aussies are going to be pretty critical and they'll spot the con.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you said that. Aussies, I do find with people I work with and clients and stuff, is they'll reach out, they'll be like, oh, you're very comfortable with getting vulnerable on camera, talking, things like that. I trust you.
Yeah.
I'd like to, work with you or something like that, which makes a lot of sense for like why people are really forgiving. And I do believe that as well. As soon as someone's sort of a little bit off or not completely honest with themselves as the authentic thing, it's very easy for people to pick up on.
Yeah, and there was a time in the 80s and in the early 90s where authenticity wasn't encouraged, where people were encouraged to be plastic, fake, someone that they're not, either in a leadership space, so then you had to sort of dress and look appropriate, but also the expectation that you would be flawless, when in actual fact we are all flawed, and we all have weaknesses and we will make errors. Again, I think Australians quite like it where and appreciate it where if you were to make an error, then you say, sorry, I stuffed things up.
I made an error.
I didn't mean to. I didn't set out to make an error, but I did.
Yeah.
Okay, what can I do to fix it?
Yeah. It's funny because that goes back to that before when you were talking about like being practical, down to earth. And just explaining the situation without advices. Yeah. But that's like a skill in itself, right? Like being able to do that when you've made a mistake, when emotions are either high or low, to be able to just go, this was the situation.
Yeah. It takes some courage, I think, and some but also reasonable self-confidence to so there's an interesting book, or interesting author, Adam Grant, and I forget the name of the book. I'm reading two of his at the moment, but it's interesting. He's a psychologist, and he also talks about how much you learn by making an error. Now that's the statement of the bleeding obvious, but what he's getting at is that why are we so fearful of making a mistake when in actual fact by making those mistakes we hopefully we learn from those. Nassim Taleb, who I mentioned it, he talks about becoming antifragile, and antifragility is learning from the mistake. As you may know, I've done a bit of sports psychology over the years as a bit of a hobby, and one of the things that sort of strikes me about elite athletes is that they're more inclined to make errors because they want to test and challenge themselves. But interestingly, what they do then is that they learn from those errors and those mistakes and they recalibrate and then go again. Whereas the amateur athlete doesn't want to put themselves out, doesn't want to make an error, doesn't want to step outside of the comfort zone for fear that, maybe it'll go bad. Yeah. Well, it might go bad. Yeah,
that makes so much sense for me as someone who is currently a professional athlete. As like when you were saying that, like why are we so fearful for making a mistake as people thinking about that? I literally had to like sort of flip that around because one of my jobs, like as a coach, how I coach people, is I sort of really encourage people to find the limits and push things as far as they can and make the mistakes. Like I get excited to make mistakes, and then like if I make a mistake and I get judged for making a mistake, that's when I get emotionally reactive for something because I'm like, I'm learning, I'm making a mistake, I'm trying the best that I can and pushing it. And part of like where I'm a professional athlete is physique competitions, so building my body up. So I'm constantly just ruining myself, and then I'll get an injury and then back to square one and fix things up and then push it again. But now I won't make that injury again, and I'll be able to like navigate around it. And that sort of really plays off. Everywhere else in my life. Probably why I'm having like some really good success at the moment with my coaching and the rest of it. Because it's always just, how can I keep going further? how can I keep pushing forwards? What's the biggest and best mistakes that I can make? And when I do, I get really excited about it. I'm like, oh, I can do something now. But sometimes if it's too big, you're like, oh, that's had some consequences. Back to baseline now. But now,
it is interesting, those elite athletes, though, they don't make silly mistakes. They don't sort of shoot for the stars when they're way down here. So
incremental.
So it is very much incremental. So again, the unfortunately, the amateur will want to go from a low base and want to jump too far too quickly without realising that in fact it is a series of increments. So
imagine people can get real down when they do that. It's like depressed, anxious, if they are shooting, because they're going to make way bigger mistakes.
Correct. And so either physically they've injured themselves and they think, well, what was the point, because now it hurts. Or psychologically, I failed, but then they haven't built the base, if you like, a psychological base where they can actually process the information to realise that that's a necessary step in growth. The trouble is they try to go too far too quickly rather than saying step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, back to the way human behaviour changes slowly by increments. Every now and again you'll get a bit of a sort of a step change,
which is awesome when you get them. Which is great.
That's sort of a bit fluky. They're the exception.
I've had a couple of those, and they're great.
So that's an added bonus. But most of it's just going to be step changes all the way.
I find as well, like just personally reflecting on just like some of the things that like I've done is like, and talking in terms of that why we're so fearful is, I think what's really cool, personal experience, is when you have decided to do something and you are in a leadership role with it, and you stay really consistent with it and committed to it for like a longer period of time than usual. Like seeing something right to the end to a longer period, it makes it a lot easier when you have a new goal or when new things come up. I feel like your tolerance gets a lot better at dealing with things and people in regards to anything once you've had a couple of those experiences where you've actually seen things through to like the very end.
Well, it certainly, we're living in a society that increasingly is looking for quicker fixes and quicker solutions. So that's a bit of a rarity then to actually see it through to the very end. So not only is that good for the other to actually see that, but it's also, feels good for yourself, because you think, well, I stuck at it. I do admire people, for example, who do, they'll do triathlons, or they'll do marathons, or they'll do ultra marathons. That is enormously impressive.
It is.
And again, I've not challenged myself to that degree, but folks who will sort of stick at it, and the reward that they derive from that, and the self-confidence that they get because they've demonstrated to themselves and to others that they're capable. But I think the same is true within a workplace. Some people they've displayed great loyalty. And they might have worked for an organisation for 20 plus years. That's equivalent to a marathon, really. So that's to be recognised and applauded. So it can come in different forms. It can look differently, but it can also be quite similar.
Well, how do you think people will actually gain self-confidence? Like if you were to say to someone, like, all right, they're like, well, I need some more self-confidence. What are some things you think people could do? Even if they're at like a baseline, they're like normally like I'd like to be more. Again, sorry, it's starting to sound a bit repetitive, but recognising that it goes in these steps. So a small goal. Confidence takes time.
Now it might be running around. I don't know, what's an example? If you can run around one block, and you might do that for 1 week, and then the second week it's 2 blocks, and then the third week it might be 3 blocks, and slowly building it up. Each time getting to a new level, but also spending a bit of time to reflect on where you've come from and what you have done. Going back to my earlier question, one of your earlier questions, how do you become self-aware? Well, you write down some of your strengths and some of your weaknesses. So you write down some of your strengths and you realise, well, gee, a month ago I couldn't have run around this block, but now I can run around 4 blocks. Or I could only swim 1 lap of the pool, and now I can swim 8 laps or whatever it might be.
Even as with the conversations, like I got rickety on a certain conversation with an employee or a colleague about this, and
Yeah,
then
true.
a couple weeks later, like I had this other conversation, it was a bit better because we've been.
That's right. Yeah. So but again, part of that, and this goes back to Nassim Taleb's book, and that is that this notion of being anti-fragile, where there is that period of reflection. In other words, of looking back and recognising where you've come from and what you have achieved along the way.
Do you think that just journaling or putting time in your day? Because I find so many people, like especially that I work with or talk to, friends and things like that, they're just so busy. Like, I kind of hate using the word busy sometimes because it informs them like, oh, it's like too much, a little bit stressful.
Yeah.
But they're just literally, it's just a lot on. It takes jam packed, and it's like how important it is. Like for some people, it's like when I'm coaching people or just helping advice, it's like you just need to give yourself like an hour break.
Yeah.
With like an intention, just to think about a few things.
Correct.
Then they always go, oh, whoa, this is I don't even realise I've even thought about this. This just reinforces all my other decisions. I'm going to get rid of all of this stuff and everything's going to be more streamlined now because I've just taken time to reflect.
Well, Edward de Bono, sort of, one of the most noted authors on creativity and innovation, says, look, one of the number one creative tools is to simply allow more time to think about the problem that you're confronting. And he said, anyone can do that.
Yeah, they really can.
You don't have to be, the world's smartest person. You don't have to be super creative. You just need to give yourself enough time to think about and to focus on that issue that's bothering you, and you're highly likely then to generate an answer or a solution. So the same is true, same principle, whether it be a journal to write down, dear diary, whether it be a training diary, to record your progress and measure it, even if you're self-assessing. All of those tools, by the way, are tried and proven. So it's not as if you and I are inventing them. They've been used for 30, 40 years by elite athletes. They work.
Yeah, journaling and tracking they work every time. Yeah, I really like that. What do you think, like personally, in terms of like some of the leaders that you have coached, just like some of the, or even like yourself personally, what do you think are some of the three, like I'd say just the top couple things that you have applied that have just worked really well in terms of like when it just had like a really good like leadership sort of success? There's any stories around that? Probably
the number one process that we've seen have almost immediate impact is the benefit of doing a 360. So 360s are where you receive feedback from above, from your peers and from your direct reports, and then you compare that feedback with your self-assessment.
Is there some sort of framework for that? Is there like a sort of tracking thing or something? Or is it all just writing it down and getting everything out and having a bit of a look at it?
I think there are some proprietary products that float around. We in business we don't. We tend to use bespoke instruments. In other words, a corporation will have its own set of competencies and will design the 360 around those competencies, because that's what that person was recruited to, that's what that person is being trained to, that's where that person is receiving feedback on, so it's logical to use that framework. We've seen some fantastic results with 360s where literally individuals' behaviours have changed almost on the spot, partly because of the holistic nature of the feedback.
Okay.
So their supervisors saying it about them, their peers are saying about them, their direct reports are saying it. They tend to give that feedback a bit more credence and value. Whereas one-on-one feedback is debatable, almost literally. The successes that we've seen with 360s, some of it has been where behaviours change because they've been told that they've been doing something that's problematic, and people have gone, okay, well, if this trusted group of people are giving me feedback, I should change it.
Is this all at the same time? 360 is the same session? So you have like a few people and you'll have the discussion?
Oh, well, no, you'll do...
or discussion with a few different people? on it.
So this is a more structured process where, in fact, you send out a survey, you get the data back, you analyse the data, write the report, feed that report back to the individual.
Okay. Yep.
So it is very much a corporate thing.
Yeah.
Something along similar lines could be done at an individual level or in a non-corporate environment, but at least for the minute we'll just focus on the corporate.
Yeah.
What's also quite heartening from the 360 is the fact that people get... I'm often very pleasantly surprised how good the positive feedback is. So even someone who is, clearly got a few chinks in their armour, is still getting some positive recognition for the things that they're doing in the workplace. So I've got to say I'm a real fan of 360s. In a more individual level, soliciting feedback from people whose opinion you value and trust, again, is really important. In fact, it's the Centre for Creative Leadership in Greensboro, North Carolina, who say that one of the biggest career limiters is the absence of feedback. So you really do need to get some feedback from people whose opinion you value and trust, so that you get a sense of how others see you.
Mm-hmm.
And again, particularly Aussies, we tend not to do that. It can be a bit threatening, can be a bit challenging, and so we tend to stay away from it.
Well, just to get super vulnerable myself, because I've worked with you a couple of times, and I really value you. If I'm going to ask some feedback from you right now, could I? What would you say?
You got to learn to wear socks.
For everyone not listening, I always wear skinny jeans, or like skinny pants at work, and like my ankles are always showing because I wear like no-show socks with my shoes, and like everyone at the office always gives me flack about it, and I'm like, come on, I'm modern. Millennial over here trying to like be cool. Everyone's like, oh my god, get some socks.
Yeah, get some socks. Yeah. Well, to be fair, and I'm not trying to duck the question, I don't know you terribly well.
Yeah,
so
that's fine.
Difficult for me to give you feedback apart from your socks. What is interesting, the little bit I do know about you, is your preparedness and your openness to learn. Again, that is a rarity. I keep saying to my anyone who listens to me, basically, but children and friends and family and people I train, you can spot a smart person a mile away, because they're the ones who are open to new ideas. You don't have to agree with what you hear, and you don't even have to adopt it or accept it and apply it, but at least be open to the idea, or at least process the information.
And try to understand it.
You can spot a dumb person a mile away, because they're the ones who are closed. And they go, no, that idea doesn't actually fit my view of the world, so I'm not even going to listen to it. That is just crackers. And the reason I say that is years ago in a former life, I ran a vocational training centre for intellectually disabled kids. Now, we had their IQ data. We knew that they were, not the sharpest knives in the block, and I probably shouldn't even use that term, but I always learnt something from these kids, even though I knew that my IQ was at least double theirs. And it struck me that their simple view of the world was quite instructive. So I would be silly to... Now, I didn't have to agree with everything they said, but you go, actually, that's interesting. So in a similar vein, I love comedians, because comedians see things differently and process different information, and that's the stuff that makes us laugh. But some of what they say is actually quite substantial or quite pithy. So you think, actually, that's a good point. I haven't ever thought of that. But typically, people are closed to views that are different to theirs. So it strikes me that you do that stuff really well. You are clearly putting yourself out there through this sort of medium, which is impressive. Most folks aren't going to do that because it opens you up for criticism, opens you up for ridicule, and most people say, no, well, that's way outside of my comfort zone. So no, there's clearly, prima facie, there's clearly a couple of things that you're doing already that are good signs that are different. Most people don't do this stuff.
Yeah, true. Just need to get some socks and
That's
be a
right.
well-balanced package.
Yes. We will always know what to buy you for your birthday.
If I wear them or not, though, it's a different story.
You use them to clean the car or whatever.
So what do you think for you personally would be some like the best either like skills or reflections that you have had like recently that have just really helped out with a bunch of things in your life?
Well, I do like the reminder from Adam Grant that, you know, if you're making, there's no shame in making an error. You know, you're learning stuff, and so part of that is as much a self battle as anything to not feel awkward or ashamed about making an error. I do like the notion from Nassim Taleb about being antifragile, in that. So, for example, through COVID, people were challenged through lockdown, and you know we would all much prefer not to be locked in a house or stuck within a 5k radius of home. But it certainly wore thin for me as well. You know, this time last year, but I learnt stuff about myself, and what I needed. I learnt more about myself and the things that I needed. So, for example, I recognised that I needed to go for a walk at lunchtime. That just made me feel better in lockdown. Now, I could stay away from people and I didn't have to go into shops and maintain physical distancing and all that sort of gear, but I did need to get out and around and just walk around the block or go to a local park or do whatever. So I do think that notion of learning about yourself and the two are clearly, those two theories are combining, to make the error, to work out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Also, I do think just being a bit more comfortable in your own skin. I think there's maybe your generation, I don't know, maybe my generation, my parents' generation were perhaps as guilty too, sort of keeping up with the Joneses. If you've you don't have to have the nicest car, house, clothes, physique, even. As long as you're comfortable with it. Now, that's not accepting rubbish or being fat and lazy, because we know we've got to sort of look after our physical and psychological health. But you don't have to be perfect. Yeah. And I think, again, COVID has reinforced some of those things that, it's got to be of a standard that you feel comfortable with. Having said that, I do think, and you know a whole lot more about this stuff than I do, I do wish that people would invest more in their physical well-being, because it has an impact on their psychological well-being.
That's like my greatest argument.
In that if you're fitter and healthier, then you're better able to cope with some of the stressors that come through the day. If you're overweight, or you haven't had enough sleep, or your diet's pretty average, then along comes a challenging event. Well, then you don't have to be a scientist to work out that you're going to struggle to deal with that situation, because you just don't have the horsepower, the energy to actually deal with it. It just leaves me surprised that people don't see that connection. I don't get it.
I absolutely love that you said that, because that's one of like my biggest arguments, and like I try to like help with people, sort of like with coaching that I do with like guys at the moment, sort of like male activation in terms of like getting your act together firstly, looking after your body so that your mind is better, and then looking after your mind, and then like what's the most amount of responsibility that you can take on for like your life, and then how can you optimize all of that as best as possible. And it's quite fascinating to see that some people like that I talk to, it could be just friends or family or just what I see around the place, is that people just really don't get the whole focus on your energy and the physiological things, and you know, that's going to build up a whole bunch of resistance for everything else. And that where I think where we can like saturate it with a little bit of gratitude and appreciation is that we get to do that. There is so much information, there are so many tools, there's so much tracking software, there's so many things that you can go, it costs a little bit of money in Australia, you can get all these crazy health tests that you can go for yourself, not to go, oh, I'm sick right now, fix me. Like, you can go now and get a blood test and hormone panel test to see, like, oh, where are you at? How can we make this even better so that when you're doing things in your life normally, you have given yourself physically and mentally the best chances possible to go on and tackle all the problems of life and take on as much responsibility as you can, which is like just fantastic that we have this, and it's like we're so blessed to be able to. Like, yes, there's McDonald's and Hungry Jack's and KFC down the street, but there is some of the best quality food that you can get in some like either fish markets or even just Coles and Woolworths, but we have all these other different fruit and veg markets and all these different things, and these beautiful gyms that we get to go train at, which are clean and all of these things. It's like, how are we not taking advantage of this? Like, really, like it really just sort of baffles my mind as well, but it also motivates me, and like people that I'm around, that when we do these things and we just feel on top of the world, it's like, well, why do we feel so good? Sometimes like, well, because we're just doing this.
But again, if we spin it around though, then what we perhaps the messaging is not so correct. Maybe we're just saying, and I think there's an ad on TV at the moment with Shane Crawford, and I think it's AIA Insurance or something or other that says, look, if we eat a bit better, train a bit more, love a bit more, then it's a better place to be. So it doesn't have to be. We don't have to sort of jump in the deep end. We can just take it steps at a time.
Oh yeah, very true. Back to the steps at a time thing.
We've got to get people on that journey, and maybe it's an event that challenges them, or it's a situation that the doctor says if you don't do this, then maybe it may not last longer. So.
There's always a journey that gets you started, and then like doing one thing at a time. I like to always kind of look at the best and then think, okay, what's that doing, and then let's start making some small decisions. Like eat a big salad once a day. Like just try that for a while. Try that. Or and get the win.
Maybe don't have the McDonald's.
Don't have the McDonald's. Try not to drink. Soft drink for a day. Something like that. No, very true. Well, I will just say, we'll leave it there. If there's any other like tips or anything that you can surely think of, for like one little takeaway for some people to take home that you think would be.
Oh no, I think we've covered a lot.
We've covered a lot.
Certainly, I do think that if individuals so you're encouraging people to invest in themselves physically and invest in themselves, which will then have a payoff psychologically. I'm at the other end saying, I really do wish people would invest in themselves psychologically. Now that doesn't, you don't have to read any of the books that I've mentioned, but you do need to be hungry for some information and hungry to learn about what does make you tick, and not so much how can I be a better person, but how can I expand my skill sets so that in fact I'm better equipped to deal with the challenges that come along.
Which I think is awesome. Now, also, just real quickly before we wrap it off, how can people find you or get in contact with you? Because some people in here might want to get you on for training. Do you run any events or courses that people could come and be a part of?
Well, it sounds a bit strange, but I do tweet. So at Scott B. Way. So that's my Twitter handle, which is hardly sophisticated. And people, I'm sure if they typed my name into a search engine, you'd find me on the web.
You're a bit everywhere.
So, and as you know, that I'm part of BDO, so they can go to BDO, who's a firm of chartered accountants and business advisors, and you'll
BDO.com.
BDO.com and .com.au, and you'll find me. So yes, I don't know that I'm that invisible, although on occasion I wouldn't mind being invisible. but I think I'm thereabouts, and I'm sure people can contact you and you can refer them on.
Sure can. So thanks so much for coming on, Scott. This chat was awesome. I've got like, I think 5 pages of notes. So thanks very much for that. And see you later, guys. Hope you enjoyed this one. Cool.
Excellent.